Welcome to my video where we're going to go through and make asteroids inside of Unity. And so this video series is going to span a couple of videos, and by a couple I mean upwards of about 20 because it's going to be a lot of little steps. But I'm going to break them down into smaller videos, maybe about 10 minutes in length, where we do smaller tasks. And so also in these videos I'm going to do my best to explain the different options and choices and why we pick them as we're building the project in Unity. And so this video is going to start with us just making the project, loading some of the pre-made assets. Assets are things like models and textures. So we're not actually going to make the spaceship graphics or the asteroid graphics. We're just going to load an existing set. And then we're going to load all that in. We're going to set up the position of the player and set up a world camera, and that's where this video is going to end. So let's start. I've already started creating a new project inside of the newest version of Unity. So the version that I'm using is the 2020 first version revision 11. So that's the version that I'll be using, and so the menus should match if you're using the same one. So I want to use the 3D project template, and the name of my project is Asteroids Advanced Game Design, and I'm just choosing it to save to a location where I'm able to find it later. I will caution you that Unity projects do not really work very well off of a flash drive. They work okay off a USB 3.0 flash drive, but they do not work well off a 2.0. So be careful if you're working this off a flash drive. So we create the project, and it does take a little while for it to actually build the project itself. Now, unfortunately, the progress bar is on my other monitor, so you can't really see it very well. But while your project might be building, you would want to go and check the online post to download the assets that we'll be using, because that's going to be the first thing that we load up here. It's about 50% through the way. It is still building the project. If you also upgrade your project from different versions of Unity, that could take a little while as well. So here is our project. So the first thing I want to do is actually start importing assets. And you can see that assets will be stored down here on the bottom part of my screen. This is the project view, and inside the project view it shows what types of things exist in your project. That's all of your files, that's your sound effects, that's your textures, your character models, your animation, your code. So everything falls into this project setting. Up here on the left, we have the hierarchy, which refers to the current level that we're looking at. So if we were making a game that had multiple levels, multiple stages, this would be different per stage that we look at. Asteroids, my design for this is going to be a single level type of game where different waves spawn. So we're actually going to have everything inside. Our entire project is essentially just one hierarchy. And then we'll look at the scene view and the inspector once we get some stuff loaded. So go to Assets, Import Package, Custom Package. This will allow us to load the custom assets that I've downloaded. Now, if you've downloaded other things off the internet, either for tutorials or different websites that may host like free Unity content, there's even paid artists who make stuff that you can purchase for like $5 to $20. Those would be imported in a similar manner. So we go to Custom Package, and I can see that I have my spaceassets.unity package right here. Then we hit Open, and it opens a menu to show where all the files are going to import to. So you can see that it's going to create an audio folder, a materials folder, a models folder, a prefabs, textures, and that's all. So you can actually unselect different parts of a package so that maybe you only want to pull the audio in from a package and not accidentally overwrite your existing stuff. But we actually want all of it, so just make sure it's all selected, and then click Import. This thing on the side that says new would actually change if it says like replace. So like if you have these things already imported, it will actually change colors and indicate what's going to happen if you tried to import those. So we start importing, and it should go a little bit quicker than building the project. And now we've got everything here. So we now have those assets loaded. So let's start placing a player inside the world. So that's we don't have a prefab made for the player, and a prefab is essentially a finished object. Once you have designed a enemy, like an enemy asteroid, that would be a prefab. Prefabs are really useful to like spawn things. So like the lasers that the ship is going to shoot will be prefabs, and the player itself will be a prefab when we're done with it, so that we can respawn the player whenever the player is destroyed. But right now we haven't created a prefab, so we have to start by loading the model into the world. So I want to use the vehicle player ship, and if I click on it, I can see some of the details about this item. I can see kind of a preview of it, and I can see some of the settings pertaining to how the model, how it's animated, and all these other different things, which is not going to be the focus of our project. It's just going to work for us now. So let's take our player ship from the project section and drag and drop it into the hierarchy over here. When you release it, it inserts the player ship into the world. The default name is the name of whatever it was from project, which we'll probably want to change. This isn't a very descriptive name. So to change the name of the object, you can either single left click it and push F2, or you can single left click it and change the name in the top line of the inspector. So I just want to rename this to player ship. You can have spaces, you can not have spaces, you can do camel case. This doesn't count as a coding file, which is the only thing that has restriction on spaces. So I renamed it to player ship, and you can see it renamed over here. The first thing I want to adjust though is the settings for the transform. You can see that it gave it some weird coordinates, which is not what we want. So I want to change these all back to 0, 0, 0. So I can type in zeros, or a quicker way, let's say it was, we don't want to have to do this for all of these. You can just right click the transform here, and you can choose to reset all parts of it, or you can choose just to reset the position of it only. And I'm fine resetting everything just so that it's all kind of the default locations. So once we have the player in the world, let's talk about how to navigate the scene view and actually kind of get an idea of what our level looks like. So first, I want to point out the gizmo. And you can kind of see another gizmo up here. So Unity uses a consistent color-coded system to indicate the three axes in a three-dimensional space. So this red axis right here, axis, I guess it's singular, indicates the x-axis, and the arrow is pointing in the positive direction. The green arrow indicates the y-axis and indicates the positive direction, and the z arrow indicates the forward axis. The z arrow is probably the most important to be aware of, because that's treated as the forward direction. And we're going to care a lot about the forward direction in this project, because the player is going to move in the forward direction that they're pointing, and the player is going to shoot in the forward direction that they're pointing. So this blue axis indicates what's considered to be forward for the player. So to change our view and to look at the player in different ways, if we have the scene view selected, be careful you don't have the game view selected. The game view shows what the main camera is going to display, which is very useful, but we don't need to look at it right now. So back on the scene view, if you right click and hold, we're able to rotate our view, and then we can navigate the level by using WASD controls, much like any first-person shooter or Minecraft in creative mode. And we can float up and down by pushing Q and E. And we can go forward with W, backwards with S, and left and right with A and D. So we're able to get a good view of any object that we're going to be working with. I would recommend against using the mouse wheel for zooming, because the zooming does kind of mess with how it considers like the view of the like when you rotate and how far out you are. So I don't really recommend using the mouse wheel for a lot of things. So we can see our ship. Now let's talk about some of the controls up on the top left here. So first up is the hand tool, which is not going to be very useful for most of our stuff. It just lets us kind of pan the view around. This arrow tool here is the translate tool. What it lets us do, I should be able to say it. No, it just calls it the move tool. It lets us move objects in some very interesting ways. So if we want to move the player's ship only on the x-axis, if we have the mouse on this x-axis and we drag it, you can see that the player only moves along the x-axis. You can also see in the transform, the location is changing as we move it. So we can actually see what types of positions we end up placing the player in. And that's true for all the different axes. If you just want to move it in one of them, just click and drag on that handle. Now, if you want to move it in two axes, keeping it locked in a third, that's what this inner part is for. So this one right here that's green, this plane that looks green, indicates that the movement will then lock the green axis, which is the y-axis, and move only in the x and z. So when I click it and hold, you can kind of see that the x and z axes are lit up, and that means I'm only moving this player in those two axes, which is really good for placing enemies in like a two-dimensional plane to make sure you don't accidentally lift them up off the ground. And so that works for all these three different ones. So if I wanted to reset my player, I can right-click transform and reset. The next tool is the rotation tool, which will have its uses. And it has a similar functionality to the move tool in that if I highlight one of the specific rings here, like if I highlight the red ring, that means I will only rotate along the x-axis. So you can see that this rotation is only performing an x-axis rotation. If I click on the blue, it'll perform a z-axis rotation. And if I click on the green, it'll perform a y-axis rotation. And actually, when we make the game of Asteroids, we're only really going to rotate along the y-axis because that kind of indicates the player turning. So the next tool is the scale tool. The scale tool, again, similar functionality. If I click on the singular axis, this stretches it in the y dimension. This stretches in the x dimension. This stretches in the z dimension. Control Z also works to undo your changes. And if I click in the center, it scales all of them simultaneously, which is arguably the more useful of the choices. I would caution you against negative scale factors. That will probably just lead to many, many headaches. Next up, we've got I forget the exact name of it, the rectangle tool. I usually don't play with this thing. I haven't found any meaningful practical applications of it. It does some weird warping to your object. And then there's the combined tool, which has all three of them mixed together. I suppose that's probably good if you don't like to switch between your tools. And we don't have any custom tools, so that's the last one. So that's how we manipulate objects. Honestly, the most common used one will be the position tool, followed by the rotation tool. That's going to be most of the tools that we use. So let's get the camera pointing at the player in a meaningful direction. So this is the main camera, and the main camera is what the scene will default to looking at the player. So let's change this to, we want it to be looking down, top down on the player. So I'm going to change this to a Z position of 0 and a Y position of 10. So now basically the camera's above the player You can even see the field of view that the camera's looking at as you look at it in the designer. But we want it looking down, and so that's going to be an x-axis rotation of 90 degrees. And so now you can kind of see in this preview, we've got the player ship looking kind of at the camera. One other setting I want to make is I do want to set this background that the camera sees to be black. In a later video, we're going to actually set up a background, either a skybox or a static image. But for now, to most closely replicate space, I'm going to switch the what's called the clear flags, meaning if it doesn't see something, what does it display, to be solid color, and I'm going to choose black. We can get a view of this. We can actually see what this is going to look like if we push the play button right here. Now, there's no scripting it or anything on this object, but we can kind of see an initial sample of what the game would look like by clicking the play button. Now, if you click the play button, be careful, because if you forget to unclick it, any changes I make will be undone when I unhit the play button. For example, if I were to delete the player, maybe I thought I needed to delete something, but when I hit play, the player comes back. So any changes made during play are undone whenever you finish clicking play. So going back to the camera, I do want to make the player a little bit zoomed out, because like if I look on this game view here, I can see what I've got here. And additionally, if I wanted to see it better, I can click this option here. When I'm on the game view, I can click maximize on play, and it'll actually take up my whole screen. And so I can get, a better game view of what's going on. But I want to make this a little bit more zoomed out, and I want this to look a little bit different. So the player ship, this is actually all on what's called perspective view right now. And so that means it's going to try to maintain a 3D perspective. So if I were to move the player off to the side, we can kind of see that it's doing this, it's giving us a bit of perspective, which we may not want in an Asteroids game. If I switch the main camera from perspective projection to orthographic, it actually removes the element of perspective to how it renders the player object, and will always show the top-down view of the player's ship, which we can see right here. It's most extreme in the edges. It's not very noticeable in the center. And so you can see that the player, no matter where the player is on the screen, it always looks like it's being seen from a top-down perspective. And that's actually what we want for a game of Asteroids. Of course, you might want to play around with it to see how it looks. Maybe you can find a reason to use perspective mode and make it look good. That's totally possible. But the vision that I have right now is to use orthographic. Lastly, if we want to get some more size out of this size refers to how many units it should be displaying. Whoops, that's the y-axis. That's not going to be very useful. I mean, that's dependent a little bit on your screen size as well, in the aspect ratio, as to how much you actually end up seeing. So we can see here the 16 by 9. There's actually part of that ratio is going to be impacted in the sense that if this is a Z height of 5, then it would be proportional to how much on the X you would be able to see. I don't have a calculator on me, but so that's like a little bit less than double. So you can kind of see that this is a little bit less than double of the Z-axis. So your actual display ratio does kind of impact that. So like if I were to switch my the camera to have a size of 10, then that should also continue to influence what the top is considered. So you can see now the top is considered 10, and so we should have, like, this will be in the ballpark of 18-ish by the time it gets to the edge of the screen. And so you can see about 18, it's at the edge of the screen. So the actual aspect ratio that you choose to run your game in, for now, at least may have an impact on how Asteroids will work. So I want orthographic, and right now 10 is fine. I might consider going 12. So choose a distance that you think would be fun to play with, because we can very easily adjust the screen boundaries when we start coding that. And so that's where we're going to end this video for here. Right now we've got the camera set up, we've got a player in the world, but we have no code yet, we have no game. So that's going to be what we look at in future videos. So thank you for watching.